Foreseeable and Avoidable, the stark conclusion of a landmark inquiry into the Southport knife attack in July 2024, when 3 young girls, Silva Aguiar, Elsie Dot Stancombe and Bebe King, were murdered at their dance class. Sir Adrian Fulford's report identifies critical failings at every level. The killer's parents allowed knives and weapons to be delivered to the home, imposed no boundaries, withheld crucial information. No agency took responsibility for assessing the risk he posed, or repeatedly failed to share crucial information. Rudakubana's dangerous behaviour was attributed to and often excused by his autism, leading to a failure to intervene. And his online behaviour indicating violent intent was not properly examined. Our North of England correspondent Claire Fallon joins us now from Liverpool. Claire.
Well, Jackie, those stark, distressing, disturbing conclusions in today's report, they lay bare the layers of failings, the years of missed chances, the known risks that were not acted on. And it meant that a 17-year-old who had stockpiled weapons in his bedroom, who had a known history of carrying knives and making threats to kill people, with 3 previous prevent referrals that went nowhere because his fixation on violence wasn't seen as an ideology. That 17-year-old, Axel Rudakubana, or AR, as he's been referred to throughout this inquiry, he could and should have been stopped. Alongside the systemic failings of the state, there's also serious criticisms, as you mentioned, of his parents. They expressed regret when they gave evidence to the inquiry. They said they were scared of him. They couldn't control him. They also withheld information. And the judge said that their inaction was a moral failing. It is, of course, all utterly devastating for the victims and their families. What happened in Southport was said today to have been an act of unparalleled cruelty. The teenage attacker targeting and killing children at a dance class. And perhaps most devastating of all, the finding from the public inquiry that it could have been stopped.
Putting out of mind the so-called benefits of hindsight, I have no doubt that if appropriate procedures had been in place, and if sensible steps had been taken by the agencies and AR's parents, this dreadful event would not have happened. It could have been, and it should have been, prevented.
It's a conclusion that means the 3 girls murdered in Southport, Alice, Bebe and Elsie, should still be here, were it not for failings described as catastrophic by a multitude of agencies, and what the inquiry chair called moral failings by the attackers' parents, who were said to bear a considerable degree of responsibility for what happened.
For our families, this has always been about honouring their girls and ensuring no one else endures what they have faced every day. The participation in the inquiry took immense courage, and seeing the extent of the failures in black and white is devastating. On behalf of our clients, we welcome the report's clear, though deeply distressing findings on the profound systemic failures and individual failures that preceded this attack, and the responsibility borne by AR's parents.
It was a hot July morning, a few days after the schools had finished for the summer, and on Hart Street in Southport, everything was very normal, until it wasn't.
It's screaming, and then I thought, that's getting worse, that. I thought, it doesn't sound right. And then I seen the girl who I know, I can't say her name, running down the road, and all these kids running behind her, all screaming. And then she looked at me, and she just legged across the road with all the kids and said, I've been stabbed, I think I'm going to die.
As Steve's wife got the girls inside and locked the door, their home became a refuge for 10 children, 4 of them with serious stab wounds, while Steve ran over to the scene of the attack.
But I did see some terrible sights, you know, of young kids that are being carried away in that. And people shouting down the phones, where's the police, where's the ambulance? And then I can still hear the crying now of parents getting told, you know, that the little one had been murdered, and them screams, "Don't leave you. Don't leave you."
Steve and his wife and others who were there and helped are praised in today's report. It's in contrast with the stark criticisms of inaction over several years. Despite known and escalating warning signs, agencies passing on the risk in a merry-go-round of referrals.
He'd been to school with a knife and a baseball bat. He'd been caught on a bus with a knife. He should have been dealt with. It's obvious he should have been dealt with. His own mum and dad should have dealt with them, but he didn't. No one did.
One stark example just a week before the attack, when Axel Rudakubana left his family's home for the first time in months with a knife. His father paid the taxi driver not to take him. But a week later, when he left the house again with a knife he bought on Amazon, the teenager's parents didn't stop him. It was the day he took a taxi to Hart Street with catastrophic consequences. For years before, multiple agencies and services had treated red flags as isolated incidents, with failures to share information and a focus on risks to the teenager, not that he posed to others. Today, in response to the inquiry report, there were apologies from the organisations facing criticism.
I want to put on record in this House my total determination to make the changes across the entire state that are so clearly necessary to honour the victims, the injured and the families of Southport.
The Chair's conclusions are devastating, aren't they?
They really are. However, they're not unexpected. After sitting through 9 weeks of evidence, it would have been a shock if he hadn't have made those findings. But it is devastating to hear in quick succession the catalogue of failures and the conclusion that this attack not only could but should have been prevented.
Today's 67 recommendations won't be the last, as phase 2 of the Southport inquiry starts with a focus on stopping risks becoming devastating realities.
Claire Fallon reporting now. Earlier I spoke to Patrick Hurley, who's the MP for Southport. I asked him for his initial reaction to today's inquiry report.
I was in the inquiry in the town hall behind me just now, listening to the inquiry, listening to Sir Adrian give his recommendations, and I was just absolutely horrified. Horrified not just by the actions of the murderer in July of 2024, but horrified as well by the repeated state failures that we saw, the missed opportunities, the chances to stop this happening months, years beforehand, the chances that weren't taken.
Rudakubana's parents were singled out. They must bear significant responsibility here. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so in the report, it mentions time and time again state agency failure, but it also mentions the failure of the murderer's family, his parents. Now, we can start making excuses for them, saying that they were scared of him, they didn't know how to cope with a violent teenager. But I think fundamentally, blame must surely fall squarely on the shoulders of the mother and the father in this case. They failed in their duty of care, both to their son, but in their duty of care to the town more generally. They let their son get out of hand, and they really, really should have intervened at a much, much earlier stage.
But there's so many things that seem so blatantly obvious. Now, we know that the Chair has said the parents must bear a significant amount of responsibility here. They were clearly afraid of him, but they also made excuses for him. They failed to stand up to his behaviour. But in essence, what we heard today was that state agencies did exactly the same. They failed to mitigate a known risk to others. They looked at him, but they were not considering the risk he posed to others enough.
Precisely that. Every interaction with the state, there were failings. His behaviour was cause for concern from an early age, going all the way back to 2019, taking weapons into school. For the 2 years from 2022 until 2024, he was practically a recluse in his bedroom. The only times he'd left his house were to try to inflict violence upon others.
Is there a question for government now about the culture of these institutions that are continually failing, in this case, to a devastating degree?
Yeah, so I'm incredibly angry that we put our faith in institutions of government, we put our faith in state agencies, and because of underfunding on a chronic and long-term condition, those state agencies have repeatedly failed us.
But it's not just about underfunding, is it? It's about their sort of approach to this. It's about them making judgments here.
It's about making sure that the people who are being tasked with keeping us safe have the ability, the capability, the capacity to do what we expect of them. Now, that's not been the case for many years. We need to make sure that stops now. The recommendations in this report today, and of course this is only phase one, there will be more coming down the tracks in the months and the years to come, but the recommendations that Sir Adrian, the Chair, has been putting forward today are a clear indication of what has gone wrong and what needs to change.
Patrick Hurley, thanks very much. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Well, I also spoke to Sir Peter Fahey, the former national lead for Prevent. His time in office was some years before the counter-terrorism agency dismissed Southport killer Axel Rudakubana each time he was referred. I began by asking for his thoughts on today's report.
Yes, it's a harrowing report when one reads the experiences of the victims, their families, and the long-term impact. It's a very worrying report in terms of absolutely the number of opportunities agencies failed to grasp. But it's also a quite depressing report because we've seen this echoed so many times, agencies not working together, sharing information in so many other reports. But it also echoes what other reports about the Prevent programme have said, that it no longer fits in with the current nature of the terrorism threat that we are facing, and indeed the wider threat of young people, particularly young men, that are obsessed with violence. And
I mean, that was exactly the point that the Chair made, that he was referred 3 times, Rudakubana, to Prevent, and 3 times rejected. He didn't fit the profile as they understood it. What went wrong here?
Prevent was put together at a time when we faced the threat of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. It was very ideologically based, and the whole definition is about ideology, the definition of terrorism. And the trouble is, what we now see, as many reports have highlighted, is we're seeing a much wider cohort of particularly young people. They're getting younger. There is a bigger overlap with things like mental health and other social disorders. But also, they often have very chaotic ideologies. Some have no ideology at all.
And what is not in short supply today is the word sorry from all of these organisations. But we need action, don't we?
We do, but we can't just keep on saying that and lessons will be learned. We have to look fundamentally at how do we make sure those professionals have the best training, the best guidance, the best oversight. I think if you talk to most social workers, teachers, police officers, they will say that they are making huge amounts of referrals into the system, and that system is completely overwhelmed by the number of referrals. But I think it's also, we've now got a confused role for the police about whether we want them to do safeguarding or enforcement. And certainly in my time as a police officer, that changed fundamentally, and a lot of police officers acting as more like social workers, without the skills, though, to make those social work assessments. And as I say, the other problem, who is actually accountable for this? The trouble is, if everybody's accountable, nobody's accountable.
I mean, it was quite clear today from the inquiry chair that a significant amount of responsibility lay with the parents. They failed to give him any boundaries. They underplayed the very real danger they knew he posed. Some people are saying they should be criminally prosecuted. In your view, is that possible? Is it desirable?
This case highlights the difficulty. Agencies want to encourage parents to come forward with concerns, but obviously parents are sometimes, understandably concerned about, what will be the impact on the young person, what will they be drawn into. But absolutely in extreme cases, I do think it would be justified for parents and guardians to be prosecuted if they willfully have not highlighted a concern to the agencies.
But you don't think we're at that point yet?
No, I don't think we're at that point, but we need to recognise the complexity, and also the way that parents are having to deal with vast amounts of huge amounts of poisonous, violent material. And we know that many, many parents just feel helpless as how they're supposed to deal with that.
Peter Fahey, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks very much.